Howdy, I'm Gray Pilgrim. I got a tale to tell. You know how in just about any human endeavor, come on now, let me see if I can get this to, are you going to stay there? You stay. That's a cheap knockoff tripod I bought at Goodwill, and it's holding a selfie stick that's got a GoPro on the end of it. The GoPro holder gizmo is cracked. The selfie stick is wonky, and the tripod sucks. You know, typical of me. Anyway, what I was going to say is, you know how in American just about anything. Damn it! Well, wait a minute. I got one of these Harbor Freight shop rags. I use them for everything. Anyway, in American everything, rivalry is how we get ahead. Whether it's in sports or in business, everything. Let me tell you the tale of a rivalry in business. There was a fellow by the name of Sam Colt who, in 1836, took out a patent based on a ship's wheel, he said, but in reality based on something that he pilfered out of the Tower of London when he was over there as working as a mate on a merchant ship, and it ended up in the Colt collection. Oh, wait a minute. I shouldn't say pilfered. I just know that he acquired a pistol. There's a book coming out from Headstamp Publishing that discusses this. But anyway, regardless of all that, he patented the revolving cylinder pistol, revolver, we call it. And that was the one. The first one was called the Colt Patterson. And it went from the Patterson later to the Walker, to the Dragoon, to the 1849 Pocket, to the on and on and on, all the various models. Well, working for Colt was this fellow who said, you know, I've been tinkering with that. And he came up, well, first of all, let me show you something. This right here is a model of 1863 Pocket Police. It's a wonderful little pistol. It has a 36 caliber. It's cap and ball, and that's the nature of a Colt revolver. And from 1836 until I don't know, somewhere around the 1860s, Colt had the patent on this. He had an extension given to him by the patent department because Patterson Colt had gone out of business. So he said, well, you know, I never really got a chance to profit from my patent, so they gave him a 7-year extension. Well, this came out in 1863, and Colt died in 1862. So this is the last one he worked on, and but it was an interesting design. Well, along about this time, he had a employee working for him who was a gun designer, and his name was Roland White. And good old Roland, he wandered in and says, hey boss, I've got this design. And among other things, you know, it actually was a pretty sucky design, but it had one thing, and White had gotten the patent on it. It had a bored through cylinder. Well, White tried to sell it to Colt, and Colt said, not interested. He was getting up there in the years, and he already had his gazillions, so he didn't really care. But this other fellow by the name of Sam Smith and his friend Mr. Wesson, they bought the rights to it from Roland White. That's another story. But anyway, they started manufacturing the bored through cylinder, and they held on to the Roland White patent because of this, which meant no one else could get into this business until I think it was 1869. And in 1869, all hell broke loose when everybody in the world started making bored through cylinder revolvers. Well, what Smith did with it was this. That's a Smith Model 1, Series 2 or 3, I forget. It's got the kidney-shaped side plate, which I think means it's Series 2. And as you can see, it's brass. It should be nickel-plated throughout, but the nickel plating on this section of it is completely gone. But anyway, this is not what I'm really talking about, but this I just thought I'd mention as a background. So from then on, Colt and Smith & Wesson were in this cheek by gel competition with each other. And Smith came out with the number 3 and the Smith & Wesson 44 Russian, and Colt came out with the 1873 single action army, and on and on. Well, then Colt hired this fellow. They started using the patents developed by this crazy Mormon named John Moses Browning. And in 1900, they came up with, Browning came up with a really good design and sold it mainly to FN, Fabrique Nationale, but he also sold it to Colt, and it was the Colt model 1900. And it used the slide, and it used several other patented innovations that they had. Well, then in 1903, Colt made that. This is a Colt model 1903 hammerless. It's actually got a hammer, but it's inside. Smith & Wesson looked at this and said, looks like these automatics are the wave of the future. So let's do something about that and come up with some of our very own. Well, Smith tried. What they tried to do, see, this was developed in a 32 auto, which was a proprietary round that Colt had come up with. It became known as 765 Browning in Europe. And I don't know if FN had the patent, if Browning held on to it, or if Colt kept it. I don't remember. But, Colt and FN had this gentleman's agreement, which was FN would take care of Europe and Colt would take care of North America, though Colt held on to England. They didn't compete directly with each other. And they could also use the same patents on both sides of the Atlantic. Well, this one sold well in both places. It sold so well that Smith & Wesson panicked because they thought, well, we've sort of locked down revolvers by now, but these automatics are where things are at. So Smith decided that they'd do their own. Well, Joe Wesson, I think was his name, son of Dan Wesson, he was born into a wealthy family and was given a run of the mill and said, design something for me. Well, he found a fellow named Clement who had a really excellent design, bought the patents, got Clement to work for him, and started building a pistol. And he built this. That is a Smith & Wesson model of 1913, commonly called a Smith & Wesson 35. Why 35? This is in 32 auto. Smith decided, well, sort of like when 4440 was made, because 44 Winchester centerfire just didn't sound right to Remington, so they wanted to call it 4440. In like manner, Smith & Wesson didn't want to call it 32 auto or 765 Browning, so they thought, well, maybe this can compete with the 1903, and we'll call it 35 Smith & Wesson, the cartridge. And the difference between a 32 auto. Now, first of all, Smith was really used to using lead bullets because that's what everybody used up until the jacketed bullets that Browning was using. So Smith decided, well, let's use a lead bullet. So they used a lead bullet that had a lead nose, and then it put a little tiny jacket around the base of the bullet that was steel, or I think copper, I don't know if it's copper, brass, or steel, I don't know, but it was a small, basically a driving band, and it was a notch longer than a 32. And it said, this is a much improved cartridge. Well, in reality, a 32 auto will fit in this just fine. But the 35 Smith & Wesson, it has quite slightly improved ballistics, but not enough to really matter. But what's interesting about this is, now remember, Colt and FN, through Browning, held the patent on the slide. This has a slide on it. This does not have a slide. It has a cocking piece. You'll notice this cocking piece right here. And you can just cock it like that, put in a new magazine. Oh gosh, this thing really has issues taking the magazine out. Now, just a second, because I gotta get it in my lap. and grab it with my fingernail, or what's left of my fingernail, and pull up. Yeah, like that. So, you can load 32 or 35 in this. And the way it works, it has this forward-facing grip safety, which you grab with this finger here. And then it has this thing. And you may notice this little lever here. Well, there's a reason behind that. With the thing locked in place, you can't pull it back unless you're Joe Atlas. But you push this thing and it disengages the recoil spring and you can pull it back. This is for cocking, but the recoil spring is just too heavy to work without, with it engaged if you want to move this back. So they came up with that because of, reasons. And then it has this really bizarre safety on it, which is it's a top or a roller. You roll it to the top, it's now unsafe. Roll it to the bottom, and it's now on fire. But you have to do it like this or this. It's a lousy place for safety. Well, at that time, Savage had the 1907 out, and then later the 1917. Well, Smith & Wesson put a whole lot of energy into this. And they shot themselves in the foot because the 35 Smith & Wesson was more expensive than 32 auto. So people didn't want to buy it. And it was a great idea. It was a great marketing stunt if they had handled it right. But they did a Bud Light on it, and they got nowhere. And this thing ended up in the dustbin of history. It's a beautifully made gun. It's well made. I know that the way you field strip this is you pull this back, and there's some way of disengaging this, and it pivots up on this hinge pin here. Very similar to the way the front hinges on a Czechoslovakian CZ-38 or a 1907 Drysa, only it hinges to the rear. But I don't know exactly how to get that undone. I've been looking online to see if I could find any kind of discussion of it. All I can really find is Ian McCollum doing an auction video in which he's talking about a couple of these for sale. But it's kind of a rarity to find one of these days. But you know me, I've got weird older guns because I like weird older guns, and they're just, well, fun. Come on now, you be nice. You do what I say. Okay, get in there. I've shot this thing. It's a good, robust, quality little pocket pistol. A little bit heavy. My Savage is a little bit lighter than this, but I've got several different weird pistols. But I saw this and I just had to have it. I'm that way. By the way, when you hold it for firing, bang, this safety digs a hole right here. It's not at all pleasant. And the later model of this, they actually made a model in 32 auto. They marketed it. I think they only made or sold a few hundred of these. I think all they ever made was about 8,000 of these total. But the second model, excuse me, they had 8 different variations of this in the series with subtle changes. But then they came out with a Model 2, which was in 32 auto, and it deleted this safety because I think they had some complaints about it digging into the hand. They kept this safety here, but and they made it so that the recoil spring was a little lighter, so you could just pull back the cocking piece. But they did leave this because people were used to pushing that to disengage and cock it that way, and you could do that as well. I only sold a few hundred of those, and then they just discontinued the whole line. So Smith & Wesson didn't really do well early on in the automatic pistol. Matter of fact, they didn't do well until, the 1950s with a Model 39 9mm. So anyway, this is a discussion of the 35 Smith & Wesson, or 1913, depending on what you want to call it. And a couple of other weird guns I happen to have laying around in my collection. That's about all I have to say. Happy trails.